What is going on, everybody? In this video, we're providing you a state of the market in stock picks for December 8th, 2022. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, consider subscribing, as we do provide daily and weekly updates to get you prepared for the day and the week ahead in this glorious markets. Now, today, as you can see, technical wise, we've broken and retested. Now, is tomorrow going to be a day where we start selling off? The problem is we don't really have a big catalyst until next week. Being said, we could potentially sell off just going into next week with the core and monetary policy could be a possibility. Again, the Fed are in essentially lockdown or blackout period during this week. Every time before this monetary policy, the week before, they typically go on a blackout period. So there is no communication. This is why you haven't heard anything from the Fed this past week. And then you'll start hearing stuff potentially over the weekend going into next week, just before monetary policy. So it'd be interesting to see what happens. Again, a lot of stuff is heavily weighed on what happens with that core. So as long as things fall in line, I do see a bit of a rally that could potentially come from that. But ultimately, aside from that, if inflation gets back over into the eights, I think that really puts a damper on the whole rally parade. And essentially going to crush the market at that point. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a new low if we jump back into the eights. But we really have to see how it does play out at this point. Now, gas and stuff is coming down. There's a lot of weird stuff going on, even with mortgage loans. People are underwater on their mortgages, and even with that being said, I think that there's a lot of trickery going around with what's going on there. Even some people that are in that particular sector have noticed that something is very different, and not in a good sense. So, and we're seeing that with again with the things I talk about, with the credit cards, with essentially the savings rates, and currently what's going on with the rental units and mortgage 30-year fixed mortgage loans. So right now, again, I think we haven't seen the worst of it just yet. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's see what core brings. Again, I think this kind of rolls us into earnings mode. We're going to have that, and then we're going to turn around and have Christmas around the corner, which is going to be slow, and then you'll have the Xmas rally. Tesla did have record-breaking production numbers, which is good. But they said that they might have to dial back essentially on production numbers later down the road. They didn't say it was confirmed, but they said it was a possibility. So that being said, what happens with our safe havens? Apple and Tesla, even though through the pandemic there was a lot of concerns, they still outperformed tremendously and done very well. I don't expect them to really do any different here. Although if for some reason they do start to buckle, that's going to be concerned because they have their own ecosystems and they are doing extremely well right now, even though there's been some big cracks that we've seen in the last couple earnings. Q4 is definitely going to show a lot. And then again, like I said yesterday, with the banks coming out and talking about their concerns and where they see the banks going is not very good. But we will get insight into kind of what's going on with the Xmas rally when we start looking at FedEx and see what happens. Again, they saw things going to be extremely bad, and that's why they dove the last earnings cycle. Now we got them on the 20th. What numbers are they going to expose? It's funny, you have these things that are getting nailed really bad, and there's a delayed reaction in a lot of what's going on. And again, they're not going to report that kind of stuff, right? Only these earnings do. It's not to say that they don't fudge numbers. I think to some extent some of these companies do, but they're held to higher standards because they're businesses. Whereas if you're the government, well, that's a different story. But nonetheless, it's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is this technical break and retest. So tomorrow, if we can break below the 3,900, I think we're going to really start to see some selling at least potentially down to the 38. I think could be a pretty good drop right there. Again, I think you need more of a catalyst. Even this drop, it was slow when it came down, but I think this next drop will be pretty big. Again, this pretty massive rip here, so and a break and a retest. Now, typically, I've talked about patterns. Patterns only play out maybe 65 to 75% of the time. And normally, when you get any kind of trend break, at least corrects down 75% of whatever that trend was. When I was talking about to the upside doesn't really play out, but the downside, however, does seem to play out quite well. So I wouldn't be surprised if we are down here at the 3,700, roughly around core. See a big drop and then kind of hover, wait to get and see what happens with monetary policy and core, and then we can make a move from that point. But again, I think even the catalyst I talk about, the timing for that has to be good, or we're going to continue to do this chop. But I think we need that catalyst to play out. If that catalyst can play out, I think this will pass. Yes, we'll have a lot more pain, but we'll get through it a lot faster, and that's essentially what matters there. So we're going to have to definitely see what happens there. The dollar itself, again, struggling around this 105. If you're a bear, you want this back over the 105. If you're a bull, you want this under 105. If it does, the bulls, I think, can at least get to 102. Aside from that, I think even if we get things in line, this thing could pump to 10 or drop to 102, causing the market to pump. And then I think that might even just be a rally. And then after that, it might just be, okay, well, everything's falling in line. What's the next move? Where's the core? Again, it really depends on what's going to happen with that core inflation. If it continues to come down, I see a lot of people take that as a positive sign that the Fed will dial back. Again, the Fed can continue to place rates. I think right now we still got a 50 and 225 point basis moves before we even consider just going neutral for a little bit. So we have to see how that does play out. But again, all that is very dependent upon what's happening with the core. So we're going to have to wait and see on that one. Dollar, we'll see. Bitcoin, again, still not really moving. Again, good sign, even with all the FTX drama, this thing is still sitting pretty flat, which is fantastic. So just kind of really watching this to see where we do head. Again, if the market does plummet quite a bit, be interesting to watch Bitcoin. Bitcoin is unusually holding extremely well. So I want to see, again, how this, again, once we actually get back into a bull market, I think crypto is definitely going to make some new highs on that end. So we're going to have to see how that plays out. Tesla, again, you get the break and the retest. This doesn't look good. Looks like we are retesting back into the channel, something I just talked about. You get these breaks and they rarely pump out, and then they break right back into the channel and they start selling off. So I have to see what happens with Tesla. I know there was a lot of rumors about Tesla, primarily. I think they were talking about the CEO of the Shanghai facility was going to take over for Elon Musk. I don't know how true that was, but nonetheless, now is a time to just throw out random rumors, and so that's what we're getting. So Apple, again, another one I want to watch really closely, especially around this 136, as long as it can hold essentially this wedge. Again, safe haven. If these things break, the whole market's pretty much done anyway. So I'm really watching this one closely. The golden apple, I want to see what she does. So keeping a close eye on that one. BA, still holding essentially this zone here. I want to see if we can break that back down below the 171 here. If it does, could get a pretty nice dip down here. Again, these supports I have here aren't the greatest. Again, you have a parabolic move here. You don't want that. You want this to break and retest at least 50%. It hasn't even done that. So you can expect this thing to probably drop all the way down here to the 155 when it does start to sell. Again, like I've said, you don't want this thing to go parabolic without providing some structure, because it just means that bull rally is going to be temporary. So watching that's coming up. Let's look at the banks. Again, I think the banks are in a very delicate situation here. If JPM breaks 129, you're going to see a major correction in the market. Again, they hold a lot of weight in the general index, so you get some pullback, especially since tech has been weak. That doesn't help either. Typically, you get a shift out of financials and value into tech. Has kind of been a rotation this year, even though tech has been extremely weak this year. It's had a few runs, but it's for the most part been pretty weak. So if this does start to sell, look for tech to try to rally. Again, I think that tech rally might be very short-lived. I think we're going to get one more drop before our run to the Christmas rally, just as long as next week again falls in line and we don't get anything out of the ordinary next week, aside from a 50-point basis move and inflation continuing to slowly come down. Goldman Sachs, again, same thing. Parabolic move, waiting for this thing to at least come back 50%. So 337. Again, you want it to break the 355 and potentially get back down there. I don't trade banks. I think banks are garbage, but that's just me. BAC, Bank of America, this thing has corrected about 50%. Again, Bank of America was a CEO that said that negative GDP. So this is what happens when your CEO says stuff like that. So again, I think this could come back down a lot more. And again, you got earnings again around that in the middle of next month. So we want to see what happens there. That's going to be kind of our gauge if the banks start doing bad. Again, you have to remember right now the market is very focused on the next couple months. So when you start having these earnings and stuff, if these CEOs are talking, they're giving forward guidance that is very looking very negative, you have to be mindful that some of them hold a lot of weight. And so when they start talking negative, a good example would be as if for some chance Elon came on and said things are looking really bleak. That would pretty much be the end of the market. But he won't. He even mentioned at one point just a couple months ago that he sees inflation dialing back, and it did to an extent. But ultimately understand that that's not going to stop the Fed from having high rates to make sure that it's under wraps, and will continue to press rate increases until we get a bigger dip, and understand inflation isn't going to be back down to 2% in a couple of years. You're going to see, I think, a little bit higher. Something we've talked about, a little bit higher elevated inflation, maybe around 4% for a while. Which some inflation is good to extent, right? Because you want to try to essentially induce that demand, consumers to want to buy, because if there's no circulation of money, right, we don't have markets. So you have to have some sort of inflation, and inflation helps kind of with that to an extent to where, people feel like they're running out of time. So if they don't buy now, that these things are going to increase in price and they're going to miss out. And so you have to have a little inflation to make that, to make the markets essentially work. So even though it's a very busted and a very busted system, if everybody just held on to their money, right, then you get deflation, and then that's great. Their dollar is worth a lot, but nobody's spending. So there's no circulation of money, so you don't have any markets. So you're just going to sit on it, and if nobody buys it, well, then that's great. You have this thing that's worth thousands of dollars, but good luck trying to sell it, because just nobody's going to buy it. So there's no market for it. That's the last thing you want is nobody buying. So you get this surplus of things, and then that means just the prices of stuff have to keep coming down in hopes that they can find a demand for it. If they can't find a demand for it, that just absolutely obliterates markets, and then there's no circulation of money. And so again, that leads to all kinds of problems in every extent. So with all that being said, that's pretty much what I got. Again, it's going to be, I think we might get some action tomorrow just from looking at the charts going into next week. I think we get that preparation potential sell. I think the big key again tomorrow is to watch the banks, watch Apple, watch Tesla. If Apple breaks from where it's currently sitting at, we could get some more potential selling. If banks break that support and correct its 50%, you're going to see some more selling there as well. I don't expect a lot of very fast selling unless we get some new news tomorrow. again, news right now is very dried up and hard to find. So, but with that being said, and you made this far, I do appreciate you, and go ahead and drop a like button. Till next time, I'll see you guys later.